Well, hello and welcome to the Impactus podcast. We're so glad that you decided to join us. My name is Jordan.
And my name's Andrew.
And today we're talking about being young, dumb, and broke, faith and finances, and what to do when you feel like you don't have either. Let's jump right in. Well, hello. We're so glad to be back. Glad to have Andrew back with us. Today we're talking about finances, Andrew. Young, dumb, and broke.
Do you feel more dumb or more broke?
I feel more broke than dumb. What about you?
I feel really broke because I am dumb. That's how I feel.
Well, we're talking about all those things. We just went and spent a nice $1 on some chicken sandwiches and
Veal sandwiches.
Veal and chicken sandwiches.
Veal and chicken sandwiches from California Sandwiches.
It was massive.
It was massive. You've never had it before, have you?
Never.
That's probably why I'm broke. California sandwiches.
Yeah, no, I'm more of a shawarma guy, but shawarma's the bomb.
Yeah, it is.
Andrew, did you gas up on the way here by chance?
I didn't. I gassed up a couple days ago, which it was a little better. The gas was a great price 2 days ago.
What was it, like 180?
I think it was, last I gassed up, we were in the 170s. If people are watching this at a later point, they don't understand what's going on.
So right now, depending on where you're watching from, in Canada and also the U.S. specifically, gas prices for our vehicles is at an all-time high. I remember when gas prices crossed $1 and people were losing their minds. Now we're pushing $2.
You remember when gas stations didn't have the signs? Like they had to tape a 1 next to the other two numbers because they didn't have the sign.
Couldn't fathom a third number. Yeah.
Different world, man.
Listen, man, we're talking about being broke and money and finances.
Which we're very experienced at.
We're very experienced at all those things and what not to do. I'm just curious, what's the most outrageous thing you've either done to save money or the most outrageous thing you've done to make more money?
I've not done that many outrageous things to save money.
Okay.
Which is why I'm dumb. I actually respect people who do outrageous things to save money because they're less broke than I am.
Do you use coupons?
I don't use coupons. I'm the kind of guy who, like, if I had a coupon, I forget to use it, or I don't want to use it because I'm embarrassed to use it. That's how I am. Like, I'm the kind of guy. I've got a gift card in my wallet that every time I go to the Canadian Superstore, I think, oh, I'll use this President's Choice gift card, and then I forget to, or I neglect to, or I just think, I'll just use my money and put that aside, even though it's free stuff. So I'm terrible at that. I don't have an answer to that question because I've not gone through any length to save money.
My wife actually, she hoards gift cards.
Does she really?
She, actually it was a couple months ago, my wife opened her wallet, or I was looking for something. I just found this stash of gift cards from our wedding 4 years ago. I'm talking hundreds of dollars from our wedding, our anniversaries, Valentine's Day, birthdays.
You better be careful, bro. She's looking to run.
Look out. Well, she'll be eating well if that's the case. But yeah, so what's the most outrageous thing you've done for making money or saving money?
Just like selling random stuff. Yeah. The days, like there's months you're feeling it. Like you open up your bank account and you're like, oh, I don't know where everything went, but we need to eat.
The key is not to open up your bank account.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they say, right? And so like you sit there on your couch and you just look at this random stuff in your house and you're like, I could sell that for $5. I could sell that. And then you start getting into the cycle of like, what of actual value do I own? Yeah. How am I broke? But I have nothing of actual value to sell to be less broke. And but that's what we do. We go and we sell stuff or put something on Kijiji and hope that I can feed myself that week.
Kijiji is like the Canadian Craigslist for the most part. But
what have you done? Have you done anything crazy to save money or make money?
I'm not a big guy that will go try and save money very easily. That's not really my thing. I'm more on I'll do things to try and increase revenue. Mm-hmm. And so for a while there, I taught English online at like 4 a.m.
I remember this. And I almost got into it.
Yeah, I was teaching English. I was teaching English online to students in China at like 4 a.m. before my workday would start. And it was just, you had to be so enthusiastic. I can still remember, being like, good job, you've got a trophy at like 4 a.m. And it was just, anyway, you can't actually do that anymore. They don't let you do that anymore. But yeah, man, it's funny we say this because I feel like, we're making jokes about saving money, like doing these crazy things, but it's actually not that outrageous of a conversation that young men are having right now in this moment that we live in. And I do want to just take a moment to recognize that in our context right now in Canada, we understand that some of the things we may talk about today may sound like a first world problem, and we're actually going to talk about that internal struggle of dealing with that. But amongst our friends right now, nearly every one of my friends that live in the context we live in talks about having a side hustle, or are talking about moving to where their dollar lasts longer,
like hours away,
provinces away, The province of Nova Scotia in Canada just crossed 1 million people because young people like ourselves are moving to afford it better, to afford it more easily.
And for people to understand, like where we are right now, that's like 22 hours away. Like that's not, it's the other side of the world in some cases, right?
And
it's way far away from your family
and a completely different lifestyle.
Totally different lifestyle. But just so they can afford to buy a home because they can't.
Afford to buy a home, and maybe have some more extra dollars to put their kids in swimming, or to have that, or perhaps one of their parents want to stay home from work. And so this is actually a very timely conversation for us as men right now in our life stage, but also many of our friends. And I think across cultures there seems to be this. It seems to be that this is something that men, and obviously we're not going to stereotype and say all men, and we know some women feel this as well, but men oftentimes feel this intense need to provide. And why do you think that is, Andrew? Where do you think that comes from? And, is that wrong that we want to encourage our men to provide and to take responsibility for their families, or should we own that? Or any thoughts on those things?
It would be wrong to not, because then we're telling men that someone else should take care of them, and that's not good for them. That's not good for their families. That's not good, for their well-being, and that's not good for our society. So we need to tell men that they need to take responsibility and not just provide for themselves, but provide for others. I was thinking, like, this probably goes back to just, like, men were always the ones who were out hunting and gathering food for the family. Like, that's really, we live in such a weird society now where everything is controlled by dollars and cents and numbers on a screen, but for most of human history, it was like, hey, how many berries do we have to eat? And is there any more veal hanging in the shed or something like that? Yeah, I don't even know. We're so far removed, I don't even know what to say. But yeah, we were responsible to do that. We had to do that because we were the most equipped to go and do that. So there's something in how God made us uniquely and wired us biologically to provide, to take care, to provide not just for our family, but for our communities, for our kids, for the next generation. So I would say that that's natural, and I would say the biblical narrative obviously backs it up. I mean, it's very clear throughout the biblical narrative that
I remember one time when I was wrestling with God's call on my life. I was wrestling with just what am I going to do for employment? I had stepped away from the role of being a pastor at my church, and I was just wrestling like, man, what do I actually do? Do I just go and drive a car for Uber? Because I will, but Lord, I want to do, if you've calling me into something. And someone just said, Jordan, sometimes the most holy thing you can do is actually just provide for your family. Like sometimes it's not that we get all caught up in calling, but sometimes there's this verse, I forget where it is. It talks about like the one that doesn't provide for their family is worse than an unbeliever. That's hard language, right? Yeah. And heavy at the moment. But I think sometimes the biblical narrative does encourage men to take care of their own, for sure.
Yeah, like there's obviously a faith element to what we're called to, and we're supposed to lead the charge in risk and generosity and true faith. And there's some areas that we're called to step into that we don't know how we're going to be provided for. I'm in the middle of a season where it's like I don't know the details of how I'm going to be able to feed my family in the near future, but there's an element of faith that we're called. There's an element of risk that we are called to, but it's never at the expense of our family's well-being, and it's never in such a way that we're requiring others to look after that. Like there's a decision of stepping out in faith courageously, but it's not because of neglect. It's not because of laziness. It's not because of slothfulness. It's not because of irresponsibility, right? If those are the reasons why our families maybe feeling a little bit more at risk and insecure about their finances, then I would say that's not God honoring at all.
Right.
Even though there are times where he does say, step out and trust me because I'm going to take care of you.
But what happens, Andrew, have you ever seen when like your God's calling you into something, but it comes into conflict with your comfort, I guess you could say. And so how do you navigate a lot of times we'll just be encouraged to have faith. Right. Andrew, just have faith. Yeah. And, and you've been in those circumstances. I've been in those circumstances where it's sometimes that just feels trite.
Yeah.
Any advice at all to?
It feels trite when it's coming from the wrong person, and it feels trite when somebody's imposing that on you in some kind of way, and especially if that person benefits by your blind faith, you know, and they're not taking responsibility. So yeah, it does feel like that at times, and you wrestle. You wrestle with like, okay, yeah, there's an element of faith to all this. God says he's going to provide for the birds of the air, and you know, he clothes the grass and the, you know, and so he's going to take care of you. And so you're like, yeah, okay, I'm going to seek first his kingdom and righteousness, and everything will be given to me that I need. Like that's the Jesus narrative. That's the Jesus ethic. And so my responsibility is to kind of live simply, live minimally, and trust God with it. But like we said, like never at the expense of responsibility. That's something God's called us to, obviously. And so like same with James. James's understanding of faith is not blind, like sit by, wait kind of faith. Like James is very clear. The brother of Jesus describes faith as something that leads to steps of action, that leads to responsibility, that leads to behaviors that are going to move you in a certain direction. That's what faith is. So faith is never just kind of standing by and hopeful and wishful thinking. It usually results in some sort of action. And sometimes those actions are in the direction of insecurity, financial insecurity. And sometimes those actions are in the direction of discomfort.
Right.
But they're action. They're not inaction. You know what I mean?
It's interesting. I'm reminded of this passage in, I think it's 2 Chronicles chapter 20. I could be wrong on that, so you can fact check me. But there's this battle going on, and they say, the Lord is going to fight our battle for us. We don't need to really do anything. But the next line is, put on your armor and go down to battle. Right. And so it's like, listen, we're trusting God's got our finances under order, but having faith doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. No. And I think that's where guys like ourselves are saying, I know you've got, you do things on the side other than your main role. You know, we talked about last podcast, how you do some weddings and different things like that. Some side hustles. And so right now, the moment we find ourselves in is in the place where we live. I think the average house price from January to this moment, which is like the 9th of March, the average house price is like $1.4 million in. And so for guys like us trying to either buy a house, or there's no option other than having a second revenue stream for the most part. And so we have faith that God's got us, but also it's like we're willing to work and willing to and put that responsibility on our shoulders. And so I just feel like this is just something that a lot of guys are struggling with, man. And the challenge there is to have faith, to trust that God's got it, but also be willing to put in the work.
Yeah. Well, be willing. So that's, and this, I guess what we want you to hear is like, if you're wrestling with this, we understand. And we understand the pain points you're feeling, and we understand the insecurity that you're feeling. We understand those feelings. We get all that. And we understand that like you're really wrestling with like, am I called to do this thing? And what am I called to sacrifice? Yeah. And am I really called to sacrifice that? Like the thing that no one else seems to be sacrificing. That's kind of the thing with where we live. There's people all over the world who never own property, right? Yeah. But where we live, like that's a means to security for your future. And it seems as though everybody around us, or at least from previous generations, are using that means of security for themselves and for comfort. And we're like, is that a cost to following Jesus, to pursuing Jesus? Is that a kingdom cost? Is the cost for us? Is it comfort? Is it security? What is the cost for us? And are we willing to really truly exercise faith and the sacrifice?
That's such a good word, because the culture we live in right now tells us that after getting married, for the most part, the next thing you must do is become a homeowner. And we know this is very contextualized to where we live. And so this is just an example for some of you listeners. There's going to be other things in your culture that maybe you can resonate with on this. But I have trouble sometimes, Andrew, determining like what's a want and what's a need. Like what is really a want and what's a need? Like shelter and housing, that's the need. Right. But housing, owning a house, owning a house, perhaps that's just a want. That by staying where I feel God calling me to stay is a part of the cost of saying yes to that call from Jesus. Yeah. But there's also other things that we have wrestled with in our family. Like we have a daughter that's 18 months old, and we're starting to talk about like, what type of sports are we going to want to put her in, and what type of extracurriculars are we going to want? And so I'm wrestling right now with these questions like, are those things wants, or are they needs for the place and space we find ourselves in?
Yeah, that's it, man. And that's the forever struggle. The fact that if you're wrestling with that That's a good thing, because that's the thing you're supposed to wrestle with. But that is the struggle, is like, what is a want? What is a need? What is it okay for me to want that? Like our daughters, they do, it's called Music Together. It's a music class. They learn like rhythmic music and stuff like that for their future. And I'm responsible to take care of them and provide them a good life, and to provide them opportunity, and to invest into their education and their skills and their athleticism, like at a young age. I'm responsible as a father. But if it comes down to it, like, is that me just doing things for my kids that other people don't get to do for them, and therefore is it just a want, or is there like a responsibility to put Poppy into swimming lessons? And is that being a good dad? And is that being a godly dad? And is that being saying no to certain things, and saying no to financial security in some kind of ways to say yes to Poppy going to swimming classes? Like, is that wrong? Should you take that money and donate it somewhere instead of putting your own kid in swimming lessons?
Yeah,
like the Christian world. We do this thing to ourselves where we make this thing so hard and challenging and complicated, and maybe it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have. We're real time wrestling with this as a couple, my wife and I, and I think too, one of the things that we wrestle with is this conversation always ends up us. Whenever we talk about money in our household, it always comes back to this idea of, well, other people have it worse. And, recently, Poppy was sick one night. Poppy's my daughter, for those that are wondering. And she was sick one night. And up until this point, our daughter, and this is no judgment on anyone that does co-sleeping or anything like that, our daughter had not yet slept in our bed. We're 18 months in. She had not ever spent a night in between my wife and I. But this one night, she was just not feeling well. And so we just said, yeah, sure, let's just bring her out. And we put her in the middle. Well, it was a complete nightmare. Yeah. I don't know how people do it. They figure it out. We have a queen size bed, but I was basically sleeping on the bed rail, and Poppy was and so it was like 3 a.m. and I'm just not sleeping. I hadn't slept yet, and I was getting frustrated and just being like, I can't believe this is happening. And then it just entered into my head, well, Jordan, you could be sleeping in a subway shelter in Ukraine. And that for sure gave me a little bit of perspective. Like, well, I'm safe, I'm healthy, I'm happy. My daughter's with us. Could be so much worse. I think sometimes that perspective can be so helpful when talking about finances, but as well, it doesn't really push you towards hope. It kind of pushes you towards shame, right? Feeling kind of bad for what you do have, but also elevates you above those that are suffering in another part of the world. So you're saying, well, at least I'm not like, I think the Pharisees used to say that, at least we're not as bad as them. Right. And so I just think when we talk about these finances, a lot of times conversation comes back to things like that. It's like, well, it could be worse. Yeah. You could live here or have this circumstance. And those moments can be helpful. Oftentimes when they come first from inside rather than someone else saying it. But
they're good when they're like, they're horrible when they're used as a hammer to slam you or slam somebody else. Like when you're using that as a weapon, man, you're just hurting somebody. And if you've been hurt by that, I imagine if you're listening, you have in your life where you were expressing a feeling or a thought or a need or an opinion or just trying to process something, and someone just took the hammer. Yeah. Everyone's experienced, like, good moms do that. Yeah. So like, good moms go, there's kids starving in Africa, eat your broccoli, right? Yeah. So like, it can be traumatizing. It can be painful when that's used as a hammer. But what you're saying is like, when that's coming from within, when that's coming from a place of relationship with Jesus, when he's calling us to these greater, higher principles like contentment, like generosity, like simplicity, like minimalism, the complexity comes when we're contextualizing it. Yeah. Like, what is contentment and minimalism and simplicity and generosity for you and I living where we live? And it does look very different than other people all over the world. And we shouldn't play this game where we're saying one's lesser or more, because that's the point. We're supposed to contextualize the ethic of Jesus. We're supposed to contextualize the gospel of Jesus to our life and live in accordance with the life of Jesus based on where we are.
Where we find ourselves.
Being conscious of what's going on around us and being conscious of those all over the world. But it's not as simple, clean, binary as, well, you're rich because you have more than this person, so you shouldn't feel this way, And
it's a weird dynamic, because it does give you perspective to be like, you know what, God, I am thankful. Mm-hmm. I do feel very blessed. at the same time, in the reality we live in, this is the difficulty. Obviously, my daughter sleeping between us is not a big issue.
Right.
We get that.
It's an example.
It's an example.
It's a good example.
But just I do think we have to think about that perspective sometimes in all these conversations, that actually a lot of these things in the grand scheme of the world picture are smaller, but it's the reality we find ourselves in. And I think about when Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, and he said, like, I think it's in chapter 4, he says, like, God will meet all your needs. He's writing this. He's writing this from prison, right? And those prisons then were not like the prisons now. Like, I imagine, and it's just interesting because Paul is saying his needs are met. And I'm thinking, man, he doesn't have extracurriculars.
Yeah.
He's not doing anything fancy. He's not having a nice warm meal or whatever.
Not eating California sandwiches.
He's not eating California sandwiches. And so
he's not texting this on an iPhone.
Yeah. And so just to circle back to the needs and wants thing, I really struggle with with that idea of like, what's a need? How do we contextualize that for the space we live in? Like, for example, is like my iPhone. Is having an iPhone in this day and age a need?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the question. Is it a need? Depends on your job.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Depends on what you're called to. It depends on what you're using it for. Yeah. Yeah,
and so I guess this conversation is just letting those of you who are watching and listening know that, like, actually we understand kind of some of these tensions that some of you are going through. It's talking about all that. Let's get practical and talk about maybe some things, Andrew, about like how we would encourage some guys to, in all these things. What's some things that you would say to someone that's wrestling with maybe not having enough money or
Well, if you're consumed by that, like if it is an idol to you, if your finances is an idol to you, if it's something that's all consuming and it's causing you stress and tension all the time, like obviously there's something spiritual happening in you. There's something that you need to sort out with Jesus, but there's also practical things that there might be something birthing inside of you that you need to take some practical steps in a certain direction, like taking care of the anxiety or the insecurity or the stress in practical ways. Yeah. When you're just sitting by feeling all that anxiety and stress and not doing anything about it, then you're probably not helping yourself, and God might be providing a way for you to help. So one of those ways is, like we've said everything we're saying, but one of the things I encourage young men to do all the time, especially young men who aren't married and don't have a whole lot of responsibilities, like make more money. Yeah. Like go and increase your work, and you'll increase your income, and then decrease your expenses, right? See how cheap you can live, see how minimal you can live, see how content and simple you can live. And you'll be amazed at the amount that you'll have in front of you, especially if you're from where we're from. You'll be amazed at the amount of generosity that will grow inside of you, a love to do more things for people, a freedom to do that, and how much anxiety will be relieved because you're working hard and you're focusing on good godly principles like simplicity and contentment. So go make more money and work hard for it if you can, if you have the space for that, instead of being lazy and sitting on Instagram, and then decrease your expenses in a way that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not complicated in that. It's either you increase your income or you decrease your expenses, or both, right? That would be ideal. I found sometimes the more money I made, the more I just spent.
Yeah, I'm good at that, so that's fair.
And so I understand that. It was amazing when there was a season when I really wanted to try and help our situation, and so there was the teaching English in the mornings. Mm-hmm. I began buying and reselling on Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji, Craigslist. That was particularly helpful. And then on Saturdays, I helped a guy that had a construction business. And so there's a lot of creative ways that you can actually have extra additional income, way more than I think there would have been in the past.
Yeah.
There's people I know that just make these printables. They design something, they put it on Etsy, and it just sells in the background. And so there's lots of stuff you can do with that. I think as well, like one of the things that was really helpful to me is finding a mentor figure, not necessarily like an ongoing mentorship, but a gentleman that's much older than me that understands finances. I personally, and this is no slant to how I was raised, but I actually was not very like financially literate when I graduated university. I didn't really understand interest rate. Like I remember a friend of mine came back from shopping one day in university, and he had bought this white leather jacket, and he bought it with his student loan money. And someone said, "Hey, John, I just named him. Sorry, John. Hey, John, you know that leather jacket right now might have been, what, $200, but by the time you pay off your student loan, that jacket will have been like $4,000, whatever, dollars, just a arbitrary number. And in that moment, it clicked. I like, oh, man, interest is no joke. And so for me, finding a mentor as a young adult was so important, that understood these things, someone that I could trust and just say, hey, man, talk to me like I am 5 years old.
Yeah.
That was so
That's
helpful.
you. I still need that, man. Every season of life, it comes with its own new financial challenges and questions that you don't necessarily have answers to. And unless you have a mom or a dad who's like super equipped in helping you through all the seasons of life, each of them need their own unique mentor for someone to be able to help you through it. So I think that's an excellent piece of advice. And if you don't have someone, you don't have to pay somebody. Like if you have the means to find a financial advisor and you're making enough money that you need a professional to handle it, then great. But there's just a lot of people probably in your own church, in your own community, friends of your parents, maybe they actually are so smart with this stuff. And you were just like a brat kid. And like, they're just like, all right, he's fine on his own. He thinks he knows better. They might know better, family members and stuff like that. There's people who could help you.
Yeah. That's been huge. Another one has just been like the idea of just actually making a budget. There's tons of apps and spreadsheets out there. One that we use was every dollar. And the premise is basically like give every dollar you're taking in a job and a role. That was super helpful. When we first got married, I gave my wife the task of adding up all of my takeout for a month. And
you're still married?
Yeah, gentlemen. Yeah, if you want to feel the pinch, you just, if
you brought that on yourself.
I brought that on myself. And so one mentor to me said, Jordan, in order to like change your financial situation, you need to be able to see it, you need to be able to feel it, and then you can change it.
That's good.
And I think for years, I made the joke at the beginning of the podcast about just like not looking. Yeah. There was actually legit months at a time where I'm like, I just don't even want to even look.
You would just scan and walk out. You know what I mean?
It's like withdrawal, no receipt, right? I don't want to see what the damage is. And so I think seeing it, being honest with yourself, finding a mentor, anything else that's
just a good principle for life. Yeah. And we don't think about it for finances, but seeing things for what they are, shining light on things, right? Looking at your finances and putting in a budget and seeing what they actually are, what comes in, what goes out. That's all you're doing is you're just shining a light, and that's a good principle for your soul and your spirit.
Keep going, preach.
No, it's just good.
Yeah, for real, man. Bringing light to things, you're never going to regret that. It's painful. It's more painful, I think, sometimes. But
because it means we have to start saying no to things we don't want to say no to.
Another thing, Andrew, that I think is important to touch on is the whole like generosity piece. And one of the greatest advice anyone ever gave me when it came to budgeting and financing was to like put aside like your money for God first. And man, that saved me so much grief, because the few times that I've like given out of what's been left over, somehow there's not always a whole lot left. And maybe that's the whole first fruits idea. You give first to God. But I'm just curious when it comes to generosity and giving, what would you say to a guy that's saying, hey man, like I don't have much money, and I know I'm supposed to tithe, or I'm supposed to give, or someone tells me I'm supposed to tithe. And, how do I navigate that when I just seemingly don't have a lot?
Yeah, I'm not gonna make take any stance on the tithe, the 10, the number, anything like that. But I do. It's actually amazing. It's a miracle how this works. Yeah. And I'm being cheeky, but there's something here. If you ask me at the end of the month to give the same amount that I give automatically at the first of the month, I wouldn't have that to give. Yeah. It's almost as though, like, getting rid of it off the top, you live within the means of what you have, and you don't feel it at all. But if you're expected to hold on to it this whole time until the end, and then have said no to a bunch of stuff during the month to then give it at the end, most of the time, at least from my experience, you found another use of those finances. And so for me, when we started, and we're committed to it now, like I'm already planning what we're giving next, because and when we're going to be doing that, because when you establish like a predetermined, this is what I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it first, you're predetermining generosity. You're predeciding generosity. It's like predetermining anything. It's like setting a schedule or making a budget or making an exercise plan or starting a diet. It's saying, I am going to start here. This is my standard. This is who I am in a moment of clarity. This is not me reacting in the moment to temptation. This is me outside of that moment saying, this is who I want to be. This is who I want to model. This is how I want to live. This is what I want to be known for. And therefore I'm predetermining what that's going to cost, and I'm pre-deciding what to do with, in this case, your finances off the top. That's kind of the principle for giving, for me at least, and it's enriching. Because then at the end of the year, you get a tax receipt back, and you're like, whoa, like that's amazing how much I was able to contribute to the work of God, and how much it didn't hurt us because it was something that we just pre-decided to do. It just became a rhythm and a natural part of life. So
yeah, I think, the saying, not equal in amount, but equal in sacrifice, that to me transformed, because a lot of times it's easy to, say, man, we're not giving enough, or I bet you this person gives more, or, you can have these comparisons or but to just challenge you wherever you are. We don't expect you to give as much as anyone else gives in number, but I do think if it's not pinching, if it's not stinging, it's you have to ask yourself, am I willing to suffer, right? Am I willing to, for what God is kind of calling me into? And that's the whole idea about generosity. And it's the only thing in Scripture where he says, test me in this. It's the only time you see him saying that, test me in this, that I won't open up the gates of blessing. And I'm not a prosperity gospel type of guy, but I've seen that come true in my life where, when I make it a point to give to God first, he always shows up in some way or another. He always takes care of me. And it's just kind of beautiful how that happens.
It is. And here's the other thing that's beautiful about it is at least I am inundated with advertisements of how things I need to consume, or things that I should want, and things that I could spend my money on that are going to bring me satisfaction and fulfillment. And what you and I both know is that almost all those things do not produce that result.
Very true.
But there's really powerful and wealthy marketers who are behind it. And the reality is, if you have that in front of you, if you have the means in front of you, you will spend that on something because it's hard not to, because you're being forced into taking in so many advertisements and marketing and stuff like that. So what you're actually doing, this is something that man, it's actually a gift. You're freeing yourself from some sense of slavery to materialism and consumerism that exists within you, but exists in the culture that we live in, especially in an attention economy. You don't have the money to entertain that thing or that new thing that's going to make your world so different. You know what I mean? You've already spent it, and you've spent it on something that is lasting, is good, is an eternal investment, a kingdom investment, and you will always feel more meaningful when you spend your money in that way. You will always feel better about yourself. You always feel more joy and peace and fulfillment in your life when you know your money is going towards good causes, and it's going to affect others, and it's going towards generosity rather than consuming more.
Yeah, totally. I'm bad for always thinking I need this new, I need a new journal, then I will be more disciplined, or I need a new tech that will, it's just awful how we get sold these messages and we buy in. And that's the reminder. You talk about the eternal part, just this reminder that what actually matters in life. And when it comes to wants and needs, as we were talking about, what actually matters in life? What matters most is following Jesus, making him known, right? Just pointing people to him. And at the end of the day, you'll never regret giving into what God is doing, whether it's in your local church, or there's tons of great organizations you can be giving to. So yeah, I just think that's a good word for guys today that feel that struggle. And listen, we're not saying, to take a vow of poverty. We talked earlier about how it's important to be responsible for your family. But we are saying that, hey, if it stings, that's okay.
It's probably a good thing.
It's probably a good thing.
And it actually means it's saving you from something else. It's saving you from the bondage and the slavery of materialism and consumerism towards something else. Yeah. And it's a gift to you. Generosity is a gift, and it's something that you should plan ahead, and you should predetermine, and you should decide in advance of, because it is of God, and it is God's way and God's will for us.
Yeah, I think those are some principles for sure that will help you kind of take the right steps forward. And I mean, there's all sorts of methods out there we didn't talk about only using the cash that you have and envelopes and all those types of things. But, Andrew, there is something to be said though about just living in that complete reliance on God and the anxiety that comes with that, but the thrill, peace, the fruit and joy that comes with just relying on Jesus. And we made some comments earlier about like when people tell us just to have faith, and there's a reason why sometimes that's just what they say, because at the end of the day, that's actually where I find we always land. It's like, well, what are our options? Our options are to have faith and trust God.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, man, if you can speak to the faith piece, and I know right now, especially in a season of just having faith that God's going to provide for you and your family. But have you ever seen God, I don't know, pull through? Or
man, I will always tell this story. When we first moved to Milton, we moved to Milton from a ministry house situation where rent was pretty low, and we were both making lower incomes, but between the two, and it wasn't costing a lot, so we were okay. But the move cost a lot, and that came out of our own pockets. And we moved to Milton as we were invited into this kind of a new pastoral role there. And so we moved there because of a sense of calling, and we felt like, okay, we're supposed to be here. At first, getting in there was a challenge, because like finding somebody who would let us rent from them was its own challenge for what we had to offer, and God provided a way for that through people who we had a connection with in the past. But a couple months into settling in, our finances just like when it's like you do a new thing and you think you planned for it, and then you don't really understand, and then all of a sudden it's like it went down. I remember being there. We were this is the story. We were walking around IKEA. And we had to buy like one thing for my daughter's room or something like that. And we were like, okay, we know we've got a couple of like accounts payable, like people who owed us something, or I was going to get an expense back. We won't go there, but there's times where like I would spend my whole paycheck for church ministry stuff, and it would take weeks to get all that back from the expense.
It felt like a paycheck, didn't it?
It felt like it was like a means to save, But there was a time where it was like one of those circumstances where it was like a few days out from getting a big influx that we needed. But like it was at a point where we're walking around IKEA and we had just returned something, and my wife's like, hey, we need this, we're here, should we get it? And I look and I'm just like, God, I don't want to, I know this stuff's coming in and we're here. It's like it was such a minor thing, but I really felt like in the moment, like I don't normally pray for money, but I literally was like, we're here, let's just go for it. I'm trusting like God's going to take care of us in the season. He brought us here. He's brought us to this point. And so we went ahead and bought that little thing from IKEA. It was only a few bucks. And we get home. And when I got home, I got a message on Kijiji. When we had moved, I had posted my bicycle, my favorite bicycle that I had loved, my single speed, on Kijiji, because it was one of those seasons where I was looking around like, what can I sell, right? Yeah. And it was my bike. So I was like, I put it up there. I put it up there for $350. And I was thinking, okay, that would help us in the season. I'll buy a new bike in years down the road if I ever bike again. You know what I mean? But I love this bike. So it's up on Kijiji. I get home, I got an ad, or I got a response to my ad. And the response was first like, hey, are you willing to sell it for any less? And I kind of said, no, it's up there for mine. I wouldn't go without it for anything less than $350. It means too much to me, And usually when that happens, you do a lot of probably Facebook Kijiji purchases. The person's like, okay, cool, thanks. Or they say something rude to you and they take off. Yeah. This person said, well, why are you selling it? Wow. And I'm like, why does a stranger care? Why does it matter? So I proceeded to tell him, I said, well, we're just in a season where we got to get rid of some of our things. And, because we just moved and it's financially tight. And so this person said, I don't know how he read this, but he said, well, man, I got to tell you, based on your post, it seems as though you really love that bike and you don't want to part ways with it. And I said, well, that's true. And this is me, like 11 a.m. I'm sitting in my bed. My wife's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. Something weird's happening here, honestly. And then the guy's like, man, I want to help you in some kind of way. And I'm like, you're a total stranger who wanted to buy my bike on Kijiji. So he offered to buy the bike and then give me the bike back. He was just like, I'll just give you the money for the bike right at first. And I'm like, it was $350. I was like, that would be really nice.
And take no bike.
Yeah. But I said, no, I'm not going to let you do that, first of all. Second of all, I'm not giving you my address because he said, give me your address, I'll send you money. And I'm like, okay, maybe this guy's a sketch bag.
Scam artist, yeah.
He keeps going on. He starts telling me this story. He says, man, I just want to tell you something. There was one time in his life when he was in this position of financial need, and some guy who he only met one time, played shinny with, came up to him and handed him an envelope full of cash that had $1,750 in it. And he said it was life-changing for him in that moment. And this person would have had no idea of his need. And it was just like this moment where he just felt like God provided for him. And he believed that one day he wanted to do something like that in return for somebody else.
And you were that guy.
And we're sitting here. It's like 1 a.m. I'm messaging this guy, right? And I'm like shattered, right? Yeah. And he's like, I just feel like I want to send you that amount of money.
Wow.
Can I do that? And I'm like, no, you can't. So then the next day I wake up and I'm talking to my wife and we're like, I don't know if I should give this guy my address.
Right.
He's asked for a mailing address. He's going to literally send an envelope of money to us out of through all this. We got to a point where we just were like, why not? Sure. You know, if God's doing something, then this guy's trying to like bless us and take care of us, and God's prompting him to do that, and that's his way of supporting us and providing for us in a season of need when we really felt it and needed it. Then let's not say no to that because of our own pride and fear. So we say yes to it, and a few days later, a check showed up in the mail.
Wow.
It's powerful. I got to meet the guy quite a few months after I got together with him, and honestly, he was just like a simple guy. He wasn't a rich man at all.
Wow.
He was a little guy, but there's something so compelling about that to me that, yeah, God shows up in these ways, and those are the moments, like you said, I'm telling you that story because those are the moments where you're like, you just feel like you're living in the grace of God. Like it's those moments where you don't get many of them, and you get emotional when you talk about it because you're just like, yeah, those are the moments that you just never forget those moments, you know?
Yeah.
It's such an incredibly joyful place to be.
And just a reminder that he sees you.
Yeah.
He sees you. You hear these stories a lot of times by other people and like guest preachers.
Right.
But you never think they'll happen to you.
Yeah.
Rachel and I prayed for a long time about me resigning from my position. Loved the church. No problems in leadership. Got along great. But just felt like God was saying, Jordan, your time here is done. And I didn't have a plan for what was next. I had didn't have a job lined up. And at the same time, our landlord was selling the house. So we're going, and my wife's on mat leave. And so I was quitting my job, and we had no place to live the next month. We didn't know where we were going to live. And my wife and I are sitting down at the dinner at the lunch table, or we're sitting down at our table, and we're just kind of having an emotional conversation about this and just saying, man, like, what are we going to do? The next day, it was going to go out public to the church that I was resigning. And so feeling the pressure of that, what are people going to think? I don't know what I'm going to be working at next month. Not sure what's going on with housing. We are looking at a potential house to rent, but it was like, man, it was way more. It was double than what we were paying currently. And so we're just sitting there, we're talking, kind of praying, and I just felt the Lord say to me, go check your mailbox. And just for context, in our apartment, we didn't check our own mailbox. Our landlord checked our mailbox. And so I just we're sitting down, we're eating. I just stand up. I'm like, I got to go check the mailbox. And my wife's like, that's kind of, what are you talking? You never, what are you doing? So I just get up, I run down to the mailbox. I open it, and I open up this card from a couple that had known me over the past couple of years, and I've served them through a youth ministry program. And they had no idea, no one knew at that point that I was resigning basically the next day. And I opened up this card, and there was a check for $5,000 covering our first and last month for this rental we were looking at. And I just burst into tears like crazy. And I go back, and I was like, my wife Rachel's like, hey, what was in the mail? And I'm like, oh, there was this nice card from, this couple. And she's like, oh, wow, that's really nice. A nice encouraging message on the inside. I'm like, oh yeah, and this check for our first and last for next month. And it was one of those moments where like, okay, God is up to something.
Yeah.
And I think in those moments when we had to rely on God, we were way richer when we couldn't have had less.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about those moments when you lean into Christ rather than comfort. Like when you say, God, okay, I'm going to trust you, Jesus, into what you're calling me into. For you, it was moving to Milton. For us, it was, transitioning from my role. when you lean into what Christ is calling you to do, and you say it's not going to be comfortable, he always shows up and provides for your needs.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. It's not a way to budget. It's not a way to plan. It's not a way to, but there are moments, man, when, there's moments where you're just living in that, and it just happened because you were stepping out in faith in something, and you didn't plan to be in this position. You didn't plan on wishfully hoping somebody dropped something on you. Just, you got to a point where you're like, oh crap. Yeah. This is what it's costing, and I don't know what to do about it right now. And when God shows up in those places, there's no better place to be. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's why the advice given to us young men a lot of times is as simple as have faith.
Have faith.
Because I think sometimes the older generation just is not really as worried about what God's going to do because they've seen him show up time and time again. And so if you're watching this and maybe finances and buying a house and wants and needs or whatever the context you find yourself in is, hear it from two guys that understand the wrestling of like needs and wants and idolatry. But God sees you and he knows you. And that verse about how he cared, like you mentioned, about cares for like the sparrows and sees them. He sees you, and he knows the number of hairs on your head, and he's going to provide for you. And if anything, let the stories of two guys that have done a lot of like not the right moves financially.
Mostly not the right moves. Yeah.
Hear this, that God still in somehow his grace, still makes room to provide for guys even like us, and allows us to live and thrive in that, man. It's beautiful.
It's good, man. I don't have much more than that.
I don't have much more. Well, guys, listen, that is the episode for today, and we trust that you are encouraged, and we're trusting that you, if you find yourself there, just praying you lean into Christ and trusting he'll take care of you guys. Any last words, Andrew?
No.
No. See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.